Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the very values we were taught to cherish, kindness, empathy, humility, no longer seem to have power in the world. Think about it. The honest are deceived, the gentle are exploited, and those who follow their conscience often end up silenced by those who act without one. We live in an era that praises virtue in words but rewards manipulation in practice. Why is that? Why does evil in its many subtle forms so often seem to reign supreme, while virtue struggles merely to survive? In today's video, we'll explore a question that has tormented the greatest minds of philosophy. Why does evil dominate societies that claim to be moral? To answer it, we'll journey through the thoughts of Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche, two philosophers who dared to look beyond appearances and confront the darkest truths about human nature. Their ideas are unsettling, provocative, and yet, if understood, they can awaken in us a deeper sense of awareness and freedom. And the last revelation we'll uncover in this video is, without question, the most powerful of all. Before we dive in, if you enjoy exploring the deeper dimensions of the human mind, of morality, and of the search for meaning, make sure to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this video. What you're about to hear may challenge your beliefs, but it might also change the way you see yourself and the world around you. Let's begin. Schopenhauer believed that beneath all human action lies a single, blind, and relentless force, the will to live. According to him, this force is the root of all desire, ambition, and suffering. We think we act out of reason, but in truth, reason is just the servant of this irrational will. Every act of goodness, every pursuit of virtue, even every sacrifice, is often a disguised expression of this primal will, a will that wants only to continue itself, even if that means disguising selfishness as morality. In Schopenhauer's eyes, society itself becomes a theater, where egoism wears the mask of virtue. People praise compassion not always because they truly feel it, but because it gives them a sense of superiority. It makes them appear enlightened, noble, moral, in a world that secretly values appearance more than authenticity. For Schopenhauer, evil triumphs not because it is stronger than good, but because it understands the real nature of human motives better than good does. Evil knows how to manipulate the hidden will that drives humanity. Now imagine, as Schopenhauer did, that the world is not guided by divine justice, but by blind necessity, a constant struggle where suffering is inevitable. In this world, what we call virtue is often nothing more than a temporary balance, a fragile light flickering in the darkness of desire. People act morally only as long as it serves their hidden will. When virtue ceases to serve that will, it is quickly abandoned. This, Schopenhauer would say, is why we see corruption everywhere, in politics, in business, even in personal relationships. The appearance of goodness hides the hunger for power, pleasure, and recognition. And yet Schopenhauer did not believe that humanity was doomed. He saw a way out, a narrow path, almost invisible but real. It begins when we stop obeying the will and start understanding it, when we look at our own desires and see them for what they are, endless cycles of craving and disappointment. In that moment of awareness, something awakens, compassion that is not strategic, but pure, the recognition that all beings suffer as we do. True virtue, Schopenhauer says, begins not from moral codes, but from this silent empathy that arises when we transcend the tyranny of our own will. But Nietzsche would come later to challenge this vision completely. For him, Schopenhauer's compassion was nothing more than a disguised weakness, a refusal to affirm life's raw power. Nietzsche would ask, if virtue means denying the will, does it not also mean denying life itself? Isn't our suffering the very proof that we are alive, that the will is burning brightly within us? These are questions we'll soon face in the next part, but for now think about this. How much of your own morality is truly your own? How many of your good deeds are driven not by compassion, but by fear? Fear of judgment, fear of punishment, fear of being seen as evil? Could it be that the battle between good and evil is not fought in the world, but within the will of every individual? As you reflect on that, remember, in Schopenhauer's philosophy, to understand evil is not to justify it. It is to see clearly the invisible machinery that makes it possible. And in that clarity, perhaps, lies the first step toward real virtue, not the virtue of appearances, but of awakening. Nietzsche enters this conversation like a storm. Where Schopenhauer saw salvation in denying the will, Nietzsche saw it as a betrayal of life itself. He called Schopenhauer's pessimism a romance with nothingness. To Nietzsche, the will, that same force Schopenhauer described as blind and cruel, was not something to suppress but something to transform. He called it the will to power, a creative and life-affirming energy that drives all existence to grow, to become, to overcome itself. And here begins the paradox. If virtue means denying life's deepest impulses, is it truly virtue, or is it cowardice disguised as morality? Nietzsche looked at society and saw what he called herd morality, a system built by the weak to control the strong. In his eyes, the so-called good were often not good at all, but merely afraid of their own instincts, afraid of freedom, afraid of responsibility. He believed that humanity had built moral systems to protect itself from the chaos of its own strength. Religion, morality, even compassion, all became tools to domesticate the human animal. Under this light, evil is not what society claims it to be. Evil, Nietzsche would say, is often just strength misunderstood, power expressed without apology, individuality that refuses to bow. He wrote, "What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness." For Nietzsche, this was not a call to cruelty, but a call to authenticity. He believed that true virtue is not obedience, but creation, the power to define your own values, even when society condemns you for it. The virtuous person is not the one who follows moral rules blindly, but the one who has the courage to stand beyond them, to forge a higher order of existence through strength, beauty, and truth. Now think about the world we live in. Have you noticed how society often punishes those who dare to be different, yet rewards those who conform? How people who think for themselves are labeled as arrogant, while those who obey are praised as humble? Nietzsche saw this long before our time. He warned that when a culture exalts meekness and condemns strength, it begins to decay from within. It loses its creative energy, its vitality, its courage to face reality. In such a world, evil does not reign because it is powerful, but because the good have become afraid of their own power. For Nietzsche, the triumph of evil is not the rise of darkness, but the decline of greatness. It happens when individuals stop striving to overcome themselves, when they trade the struggle for comfort, the truth for safety, and integrity for approval. This is what he meant when he declared, "God is dead." He was not celebrating the death of divinity, but lamenting the death of meaning, the death of the individual's ability to create values. In that vacuum, a new kind of evil arises, not the evil of passion, but the evil of indifference, a lifeless conformity that smothers everything that is bold, unique, and alive. And yet, Nietzsche was not without hope. He envisioned a new kind of human being, the Übermensch or Overman, one who transcends both good and evil, as defined by society. This being would not be moral or immoral, but beyond morality. He would live according to his own laws, guided not by fear or guilt, but by love for life itself. The Overman creates meaning where there is none, bringing light into the abyss through his will to create. He does not flee from suffering. He embraces it as the crucible of transformation. But Nietzsche's vision is not easy to live. It demands an honesty so brutal that most people turn away from it. It means asking yourself, if all moral values were stripped away, who would you be? Would your actions still have meaning? Or do you depend on society's approval to know that you are good? Nietzsche would say that as long as you need permission to be virtuous, you are not truly free. Virtue to him is not a mask, but a manifestation of inner strength, the overflowing of a soul that has conquered itself. And so Schopenhauer and Nietzsche stand as two mirrors facing each other, one reflecting the darkness of suffering, the other the fire of transformation. Schopenhauer tells us that virtue begins when we renounce the will. Nietzsche tells us it begins when we master it. Between them lies a truth that neither fully captured, but both revealed. Evil is not something that exists outside of us. It is the shadow of our own potential. When we deny our desires, they fester and corrupt us. When we indulge them blindly, they consume us. Only by facing them consciously can we begin to transform them into something higher. As you listen to this, ask yourself, what is your own relationship with power? Do you see it as something dangerous, or as something sacred? When you do good, is it because you fear to do wrong, or because you truly love what is right? The difference is everything. It is the line between morality and authenticity, between hypocrisy and awakening. In the next part, we'll explore how these two seemingly opposite philosophies, Schopenhauer's compassion and Nietzsche's power, actually converge in one of the greatest paradoxes of all, that true virtue can only emerge when we fully understand evil. And this understanding, as you will see, may forever change the way you see the human soul. If Schopenhauer taught us that virtue begins in compassion, and Nietzsche taught us that virtue begins in strength, then the truth must lie somewhere between these two extremes, in the paradox that only those who truly understand evil can rise above it. To understand this, we must first realize that evil is not simply the opposite of good. It is the distortion of good, the corruption of our deepest impulses. Both philosophers, in their own ways, recognized that the roots of evil lie not in some supernatural force, but in the human soul itself. And that means the battle between good and evil is not fought in heaven or hell, but within the secret chambers of our consciousness. Schopenhauer saw evil as the manifestation of the individual will that refuses to recognize itself in others. When a person acts cruelly, they do so because they see the world as separate from themselves. They have not yet awakened to the truth that all beings share the same essence, the same blind will, the same pain, the same yearning to exist. Compassion, for him, is not a commandment, but an insight, a sudden vision that breaks the illusion of separation. In that moment, the boundary between me and you dissolves. To harm another becomes as senseless as harming your own hand. This awakening, Schopenhauer believed, was the foundation of moral life. But Nietzsche would challenge this once more. He would ask, if compassion is born from weakness, is it not also capable of turning into resentment? When those who suffer begin to moralize their suffering, to see their weakness as moral superiority, compassion can become a weapon. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, the moral system created by the powerless to justify their impotence and to condemn the strong. In this view, the meek do not inherit the earth because they are virtuous, but because they have learned to guilt the powerful into submission. It is a morality of revenge disguised as goodness. Here lies the terrible paradox of virtue. Even our most noble emotions can decay into subtle forms of evil. The desire to help can turn into the desire to control. The impulse to forgive can turn into moral pride. The wish to be pure can turn into hatred for those who are not. Schopenhauer saw this danger too, though in different words. He knew that the ego, cunning and tireless, can infiltrate even the highest ideals. It can make us humble only to be admired for our humility, generous only to be loved for our generosity. The more we chase virtue, the more elusive it becomes, because we are still motivated by the will, the craving to affirm our identity, to be someone, to matter. And yet, this very struggle is what defines us as human. Nietzsche saw in it the possibility of transformation. He did not want to destroy morality. He wanted to transfigure it, to turn it into an art form, a personal creation born from the depths of one's being. True virtue, for him, is not universal. It is individual. It cannot be copied because it is the expression of a unique soul that has faced its own darkness and emerged stronger. He once wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." This chaos is the confrontation with one's own evil, the raw material from which true virtue is sculpted. Think for a moment about your own life. How often do we hide our anger, our envy, our pride, pretending they do not exist, rather than trying to understand them? But whatever we repress does not disappear. It grows stronger in the shadows. When denied, our darkness controls us from beneath our awareness. Schopenhauer warned that the will cannot be destroyed by ignorance, only by insight. Nietzsche agreed, though he gave it a different form. He believed that only by looking into the abyss without fear could we discover who we truly are. He who fights with monsters, he wrote, should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This is the central tension of human morality, to gaze into the abyss without falling into it, to recognize the potential for evil within ourselves without becoming enslaved by it. The individual who dares to do this, who dares to look honestly at their motives, their weaknesses, their desires, is already walking the path toward genuine virtue. Because they are no longer pretending. They are no longer good out of fear, but out of understanding. Schopenhauer would call this awareness the quiet extinction of the will. Nietzsche would call it self-overcoming, but both point to the same realization, that the highest form of goodness is not purity, but integration. To be virtuous is not to be without darkness, but to master it, to turn it into light. The saints who never sin, Nietzsche said, are not admirable. The ones who fall and rise again, who transmute their flaws into wisdom, are the true creators of value. Virtue, then, is not the absence of evil. It is the alchemy that transforms it. So what does this mean for us today? In a world where deception and greed seem to triumph, it means that the answer is not in moralizing others, but in understanding ourselves. The reign of evil in society reflects the unconsciousness of its individuals. When we fail to recognize our own capacity for cruelty, we project it outward. We create enemies, scapegoats, and systems of blame. But when we bring awareness to our own shadows, when we see that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart, we begin to dissolve the very structure that allows evil to dominate. The question then is not, how do we fight evil, but rather, how do we awaken? Because once you awaken to the truth of your own nature, once you see that both the saint and the sinner live within you, you can no longer be deceived by appearances. You begin to live from a place that is deeper than morality, a place of consciousness, of authenticity, of freedom. And in the final part of this journey, we will uncover the ultimate revelation, the one that unites Schopenhauer's compassion and Nietzsche's strength into a single transcendent understanding of virtue, the insight that true morality is not about being good, but about being whole. And this realization, as you will see, can change everything. What if the true purpose of virtue was never to destroy evil, but to understand it? What if morality in its highest form is not the rejection of darkness, but the illumination of it? Both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, though seemingly opposed, lead us to this single hidden truth. The essence of human greatness lies not in being purely good, but in becoming conscious of both our light and our shadow, and choosing, freely, consciously, who we wish to be. Schopenhauer's compassion without strength becomes resignation. Nietzsche's strength without compassion becomes tyranny. But when these two forces meet, when strength learns empathy and compassion learns courage, something extraordinary happens. We begin to transcend both good and evil. This is the birth of the integrated human being, one who no longer acts out of fear or ego, but out of understanding. Schopenhauer wanted to free us from suffering by quieting the will. Nietzsche wanted to free us by transforming it. Both paths are attempts to reconcile the same conflict within the human soul, the desire for peace and the need for power, the longing for meaning and the fear of nothingness. The paradox of virtue is that we cannot truly become good until we first see the roots of evil within ourselves. The one who has never faced temptation, who has never battled the darker parts of the self, does not possess virtue, only innocence. Virtue is born only when innocence dies and wisdom takes its place. Think about this carefully. To be truly moral, one must be capable of immorality. Only the person who knows what they could do and chooses not to is truly free. This is why Nietzsche's ideal, the overman, stands beyond conventional morality. He is not good because he is afraid to be bad. He is good because he has integrated the possibility of evil into his strength. He does not deny the abyss. He builds his home at its edge and from there creates beauty. Schopenhauer's sage, too, stands in quiet awareness, his heart open to the suffering of all beings. Both, in their own ways, have transcended the illusions that enslave most people, the illusions of reward and punishment, guilt and pride, sin and virtue. In this synthesis, we find the highest form of morality, conscious virtue. It is not dictated by commandments or rules, but arises naturally from understanding. When you understand the pain that drives cruelty, you cannot hate. When you understand the weakness behind arrogance, you cannot envy. When you understand the longing behind corruption, you cannot condemn. Awareness does not excuse evil. It transforms it. It turns judgment into wisdom and fear into compassion. This is the revolution of consciousness that both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, each in their own way, were pointing toward. Look at the world around you. We live in an age obsessed with appearing virtuous, but terrified of truly being it. People curate their goodness on screens, but behind the mask, envy, resentment, and despair grow unchecked. Schopenhauer would say that we suffer because we are slaves to the will, endlessly wanting, endlessly comparing. Nietzsche would add that we suffer because we are afraid to live, afraid to embrace the full spectrum of our being. Both diagnoses are true, and both lead to the same cure: to awaken, to see through the illusions of ego and morality, and to take responsibility for the whole of who we are. When you begin to awaken, you no longer seek to destroy your shadow. You learn to dialogue with it. You no longer chase perfection. You cultivate presence. And you realize that the reign of evil in society begins with unconsciousness, but it ends with self-knowledge. Every act of awareness, every moment of honesty with oneself, is a small rebellion against the reign of evil. It is the light that spreads silently, not through preaching but through being. Perhaps this is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of becoming who you are. Not a command to invent yourself from nothing, but an invitation to uncover the wholeness that has always been hidden within you. And perhaps this is what Schopenhauer felt when he spoke of compassion. Not pity, but recognition. The realization that all life suffers and strives under the same mysterious will. The path of virtue, then, is not upward toward heaven, nor downward into denial, but inward, into the depths of consciousness itself. So the final revelation is this: good and evil are not enemies, they are mirrors. Each reflects what we have yet to integrate within ourselves. The truly virtuous person does not fight evil. They understand it, absorb it, and through that understanding, transform it into wisdom. This is not moral relativism. It is moral transcendence. It is to rise above the war of opposites and see that both are expressions of the same human longing, the will to exist, to matter, to become whole. In the end, the greatest power is not domination, but awareness. The greatest strength is not conquest, but understanding. And the purest virtue is not the denial of evil, but its transformation into light. When you reach this understanding, you no longer ask, why does evil reign in society? Because you see that evil reigns only where consciousness sleeps. The moment one human being awakens fully, even for an instant, the spell of evil is broken, at least within them. And that is how the world changes. Not through revolutions of force, but through revolutions of understanding. So ask yourself now, where does evil still reign within you? In resentment, in fear, in pride? Can you look at it, not to judge but to understand? Because in that gaze, in that brave act of seeing clearly, you are already transforming it. You are already free. And that, as both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche would agree in their own ways, is the beginning and the end of true virtue. Thanks for looking.